Thank you for coming. Monarchs, I think they are my favorite summer residents in Maine, and I'm going to share some of what I know about them with you. Please, if you have questions, ask at the end. This is my background. As a classroom teacher and administrator, I am a Maine Master Naturalist, member of the Maine Entomological Society, Penn-based steward, been engaged in and continue to be engaged in citizen science projects, especially focused on monarchs. I have a lifelong interest in Maine's flora and fauna, and in particular, monarchs. I've made 2 migrations of my own to Michoacan, Mexico. I want to share with you before we begin, who are the people that I depend on for information and what are my go-to sources. Chip Taylor founded Monarch Watch through the University of Kansas at Lawrence. This has been an active program since 1992. If you are aware of the Monarch tagging program, it is out of Monarch Watch. MJV, Monarch Joint Venture, is an umbrella organization of federal, state agencies, organizations such as Monarch Watch, University of Minnesota, community groups, academic programs that are dedicated to the conservation of monarch butterflies and other pollinators in particular. I won't struggle with the last name that's on the list, but he wrote a remarkable book about monarchs and milkweed and the relationship between the two, a coevolution story, masterwork, and ongoing researcher. I'm going to start with this article with National Geographic because I'd like to set the history straight. This was National Geographic's issue, August 1976, was one of the major journals published in the past 30 years. And it was about finding the monarch's winter home. Fred Urquhart was a major researcher. He was very aware of the monarch migration, and he really became fascinated with where do the monarchs go in the winter. And he started some preliminary tagging programs, but he just wasn't getting results. So what actually happened was that he and his wife, who was his work partner, sent out a request for people in the Mexico area. Can you help us solve this mystery? Well, Catalina Aguado was from Michoacan, Mexico, which is where the overwintering sites are. And in 1972, she was shown a newspaper notice from the Urquharts concerning the hunt for the butterflies. Well, she and her eventual husband searched for clues, and they started hiking in the higher mountains of Michoacan, which has a major volcanic ridge running through it. And on January 2nd, 1975, in Sierra Pelon, they found an area which was covered with millions of monarchs. And on January 9th, they called the Urquharts and reported their find. So that picture that's on the cover of National Geographic's is her during the discovery time. And she deserves acknowledgement for her major find. So where are the monarchs now that have overwintered in Mexico this past year? This is a map from Journey North, which is a program that's available online. It is free. It is a major site for collecting data on a variety of species, and in particular, in this case, the monarchs. If you notice here in the key, this is for the sighting of monarch adults for the first time. And reading through before March 1st and then all the way up, this will go up through the end of the summer. And if you notice the dots here, these are all people that are reporting in for having first sightings. And it's a site where you can just record a sighting. You can also give more information. And researchers use this site on a regular basis. The monarchs' overwintering sites are on just 12 remote mountaintops in Mexico's transvolcanic belt, which is rich in iron, which aid the monarchs in their migration. The sites are home to trees that are not only rare, they are endangered. They are called oyamel fir trees, and they grow at altitudes of between 2,400 and 3,600 meters. That's quite high when you compare that to Mount Batty in Camden, which is 238 meters. It is a World Heritage Site. It is called the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere, and it has been a World Heritage Site since 1980. These are some images of the overwintering sites, and it truly is impossible, in my experience, to share what it is like to be in amongst these trees that are very tall, soaring overhead, and covered with millions and millions of life forms. If you notice in this picture here, what looks like, if this was a different forest, you would say, well, these are dead and dying trees. No, these are the monarchs. And when you consider that a monarch's average wingspan is 4 inches, you can just kind of imagine how many of those butterflies it would take to make that kind of coloration. Over here, this is the oyamel tree with the monarchs roosting. And this picture down below is monarchs doing what's called puddling. They're drinking water. These are the overwintering sites. Sorry. These are the overwintering sites. On the smaller map, here's the red square matching this red square. Mexico City. And again, here's the key here for 20 miles. So you can see this is really a small area where these millions and millions of butterflies find their way to each fall. And this is the site where the monarchs were discovered. We are now in the cycle of the year where the monarchs have left the overwintering sites. The overwintering sites now are basically empty. March through April, the monarchs, as you could see on the Journey North map, have made it through Texas and are working their way up. Unfortunately, what's happening now in Texas is it's reportedly very dry. There are few nectaring plants available and not a lot of milkweed growth. but things can change fairly rapidly over the weeks and days. So we are going to be seeing monarchs, the following generation of monarchs, the end of June to July. So this is their summer residency. Monarchs are now located worldwide, and we're not quite sure why. We don't have a clear record of different places in the world where monarchs have been seen over years. We do have monarchs that live in New Zealand, Hawaii, the Azores, but the only monarchs that are known for their migration, the North American migration, which is possibly a 3,000-mile journey for one butterfly, it's only in North America. And the Eastern will divide the population up into the two divisions of Eastern and Western monarchs. Eastern monarchs migrate upwards of 3,000 miles to overwinter in Michoacan, which provides a very specific microclimate for them. Western monarchs also migrate in the fall, flying up to hundreds of miles to coastal overwintering groves. They are very different from those found in Mexico, but they're specific microclimates. Fewer monarchs in the Western population, and as some of you may know, the numbers dropped dramatically in the last year, and there suddenly was a boom in the population, a small boom, but a welcomed one. They do not know why it happened. There are too many factors involved, but everyone is quite relieved to see the numbers have gone up. Western monarchs have a shorter diapause compared to those of the Eastern population. And diapause is when the monarchs are not sexually active. When they are in the overwintering sites, they are resting, drinking water, living off the body fat that they've accumulated in the migration. And it's only in February that they become sexually active. So concerns for both the Eastern and the Western population. Climate change. When was the last time the CO2 levels were as high as they are now on Earth? Well, the last time the levels were this high was 2 to 5 million years ago. Sea levels were estimated at 50 feet higher than there are today, and forests grew as far north as the Arctic. So the question is, the big questions are, what is going to be the effect on the wintering sites? They are going to be dramatic. What's going to be the effect on milkweed? Because plants are affected by climate change as to their, in particular, as far as milkweed goes, into their level of toxicity. And in general, what will be the effects on the monarch populations? Can we protect them and can we save them? This is a map from Monarch Watch, and it shows the rate of temperature increase per decade between 1975 and 2020. And you're looking at, I'm not sure, excuse me. Excuse me. Nope. Thank you. Sorry. I'm not sure why the New England states aren't in the red zone, though I would suspect they're close to it. These are areas that are experiencing droughts, and it's of major concern. The one fortunate area that the monarch population still has is what is called the flyway. Once they get past Texas, they're hitting the mid-states and going up to Canada. And this is more of a safe region for them. But look at the comparison between the safe area and the unsafe area. And again, I look at a lot of things through the needs of monarchs, but monarchs are an indicator species. If things are going well for monarchs, they're going well for a great many other living things, including human beings. So another map. The breeding area for the eastern population of monarchs. Where do the majority of monarchs migrate from? That central flyway here. Northwest 12%, 38, 11%. Combine that, it's a real strong number. 15% from the Northeast. That's not a, out of 100, that's 15 butterflies. But because of all the threats that the monarchs are up against, that 15% means a great deal. And so what we can provide to monarchs throughout New England and in Maine is an essential contribution to them being able to get to Mexico and continue the cycle. This is a grid of news. If you go back to the highest number that we had, over 18 hectares of butterflies, that was in 96, 97, the overwintering. And it has steadily decreased down to 2013, 14, which was a really scary time. During that, many summers, I would collect up to 200 eggs or larvae and rear and release them through the season. That year, I found one adult butterfly along the beaches outside of Portland. That was it for that year. And then some of you may recall the higher numbers that we experienced 2018, 19. People were saying that, they were seeing monarchs everywhere and it was a delight. And then again, we drop off. We do not have the numbers for this year. They're a month late. We don't know why the numbers have not been released yet. But this steady decline is something that we hope to be able to turn around. If we are unable to turn this around, within 20 years, the chances of the Western population being able to revive is significantly low. Within 60 years, we may lose the population altogether. The Eastern population, it is predicted that it can survive through 2075. And again, I hope we can turn it around. So let's talk a little bit about the generations. The first generation of monarchs, the mating begins in February at the Overwintering Sites, about the middle of the month, and it can become quite frantic. And the females will mate, and then they can hold the sperm for fertilization as they head north. And it can take days to weeks for them to reach a location where they find sufficient milkweed. The temperature is important for generation one. The temperature, the weather, and the availability of good host milkweed plants. The cooler the temperatures, the slower the development. And that holds the cycle back if we have a slow start with the first generation. Good milkweed, temperature, and low predation levels are important for that first generation. And right now, as I had mentioned, Texas is very dry, and that's a concern. And then there's the predation level. Predators, ladybugs, ants, spiders, lacewings, earwigs, mantids, and an assortment of wasps will attack monarch larvae and can consume the eggs. So only about 5% of the monarch larvae reach the final growth stage, which is when they transform into the chrysalis. And in one field study, the mortality was up to 90% within 72 hours of a population being laid. One of the things that I've recently learned in this connection with monarchs eating milkweed, which protects them from predators, wasps could be sensitive to that, the cardinaloids that are in the milkweed that the monarch larvae eat. And when the numbers are high enough, the wasps evidently have a difficult time with reproduction. And so that may cut down on their population, which is an interesting part of this whole web of life that connects the monarchs and the milkweed, and then all other creatures that live within that milkweed community. Monarchs lay between 100 to 300 eggs. In optimal condition days, it's anywhere from 3 to 5 days for the eggs to hatch. You will probably have heard that monarch females look for healthy milkweed, which they do, and they lay their egg on the underside of the leaf. They often do, but they often will put that egg anywhere on the milkweed plant. Here's a milkweed plant that's just sprouting, and it already has 2 eggs on it. Could be another one on the other side. This is the blossom cluster with, I think 7, 8 eggs at least on this. This many eggs on one specific site is what's referred to as egg dumping. It really creates a challenging situation for those larvae, because if they were all to survive, they would be looking to that, initially that one milkweed plant as a food source. And that's a lot of mouths to feed. This is a milkweed egg, a monarch egg. And it has this slightly pointed dome shape. It has a pearl kind of luster to it. You will often see little white beads on milkweed. And if you look closely, they are not shiny. They're rather matte, and those are breaks in the veins of the milkweed. So they often get confused for eggs. And this is just a delightful picture of an egg that was laid on an aphid. And this is an egg laid on a larva. So sometimes a female monarch's aim is not as precise as the textbooks might say. So egg, first instar. When the caterpillar eats enough for that growth period, it will rest for a day or so. It will shed that skin into the second, third, fourth, and finally the fifth instar. This can take 11 days. It can take 14 days. Again, it depends on weather and temperature conditions. In this image here, what's happened is, and it's what happens on milkweed leaves, the larva is able to break the veins which carry the latex, the toxin. And if the caterpillar gets coated with that toxin, with that, that latex, and it dries, it forms a solid mask on the face of the caterpillar, which will kill it. So it works its way through in a very specific way to avoid that latex and continue to consume the milkweed. After the larva has reached the fifth instar, it will create a silk pad on a surface. Usually you won't find this on milkweed itself. They look for something that is as stable as possible. And this silk pad is attached, and then the caterpillar turns itself around, attaches its back end to the silk, and there is this part in its abdomen that becomes what's called the cremaster. And this monarch here, there's the silk pad, there's the cremaster. You can see this is a chrysalis that has just formed. It's hours old. But even within an hour, you can begin to see where the butterfly is. You'll see here the lines for the abdomen, here are the wings. If you were to rotate this chrysalis, you would see the lines that are the antenna. So from the very beginning, from when that chrysalis is formed, the cells are already in place for the adult monarch to eventually emerge. This beautiful pink chrysalis here is of a relative of the monarch. This is the queen. And it's my ambition one day to see one of those because they're rather lovely. Here is the stages from when the jay is formed, the caterpillar forms its jay, and over the hours, it will begin to work its way free of the outer skin. It wiggles a little like flubber, jiggles around, shedding that final skin. And this, within minutes, becomes this. After about 10 days, if it is a healthy monarch, you will begin to see the orange show through. And if it is a quiet day and you're nearby, you can hear a slight sound of like tissue paper crinkling, and it is the monarch beginning to push its way out of the confining shell that it's in. The antenna, the feet are already in position to hold on so that when the body drops to hang free, it's right in position. And over minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, these wings will expand until there's the full-formed adult. Not the monarch will stay in that position for a number of hours, because what's happening, though it looks as if it's very still and just waiting to take flight, it's actually pumping fluid through these veins. And then it will expel the fluid that is not needed out of its body. And it will take a couple of hours for it to be inclined to take flight. By the way, the idea that these wings are living parts of the butterfly is a relatively new discovery. And what happens is that continually these veins push fluid through for the life of the butterfly. And this is just one of my favorite cartoons. Newly emerged male. Newly emerged monarchs are brighter in color. They tend to fade. I have another image to show you, but their colors are very bright. But what says this is a male is on the two hind wings, you will see this vein here, and you'll see this enlarged dot here. This indicates the male. Female, again, strong colors. The female's wing veins tend to be thicker, and the females also tend to be larger, especially in my experience with the migrating population. This is a well-worn, weathered adult monarch. Often see a monarch like this in Mexico, but even with the tatters, it's still quite able to fly and to perhaps reproduce. But striking difference between a newly emerged and a seasoned butterfly. An adult monarch weighs no more than 5 grams. And if you want to consider the weight of monarchs, hold a penny in your hand, and that's about the weight of 5 adults. I love this picture because there's such a contrast between the position of the wings and the position of the body. And the monarch butterflies hold their bodies in almost a horizontal position, while their wings are moving in what would, if our eyes could follow it, be an almost a figure 8 motion. The wings move and swirl the air to create a vacuum. There's a change in pressure, and it moves the butterfly up through the air. The scales on butterfly wings have edges that help the wings to cut the air. They're just a fascinating piece of engineering. What I learned this past year, and I don't know how I missed it, but I have, is that the adult monarch carries the toxin in the wings. So that bright orange is a signal in a lot of ways. Bright orange is don't touch me, I don't taste good. And by the way, if you take a bite of those wings, you're going to find out how unpleasant I am. I have a video of a hawk that captured a monarch and then spit it out. The wings are toxic. The wings also of course, provide the transportation for the insect, but they provide heat control, heat and cooling control throughout the butterfly's life. They're not, as was once thought, these inert appendages of the butterfly. They are a living part of the creature. Generation 2. The adults emerge as opposed to hatch in June and July. They mate and lay eggs quickly, and they continue the cycle on, and each generation moves further and further north. How far north? As far as the butterfly can locate milkweed. And so as far as Labrador monarchs have been found laying eggs and procreating. Again, the concern is, what is the impact of climate change on this whole process? The OML trees in Mexico need cold mountains, cold temperatures, and mountains can only go so high. And if the milkweed, the healthy milkweed ends up being farther and farther north, how is that going to affect the migration? Because monarchs can only travel so far in a cycle. These are the OML trees. What's interesting about this image is that when you are in the forest, the trunks are so tall that the bottom is relatively bare, fewer trees, but they grow at an altitude of, let's say 2,000 to 4,000 meters. In cloud forests, they require cool, humid summers and dry winters. And what's happening now in the reserves in Mexico is that they are beginning to plant OML trees higher and higher up the mountains in order to make sure that the monarchs have a place to come to.
Cyrene, you have about 10 minutes left.
Okay, well, then Monarch Defenses, the adult wings, the larva, the toxicity, they don't move. If you see this, and you're going to see this probably in June, this is a Belfast viceroy. Major threat to the monarch is OE. It is a parasite which is natural in the environment, but if the concentration becomes too intense, it will kill either the caterpillar or the chrysalis, or it will damage the butterfly. The positive part about this is monarchs that are highly infected have a very low chance of making it to the overwintering sites. So there is a elimination of the OE to a significant extent. The other thing that has just recently been discovered is that monarchs have been observed on wounded or dead leaves of certain plants that contain toxic chemicals known as PAs. And what they can do is they either can extrude a liquid, let's call it spit, and then suck it up through the proboscis, or they can scratch the surface of the leaf with their feet and then again ingest what's on the leaves. And this seems to have an impact, it counteracts the impact of OE. And this is just recently been realized, and it is a major citizen science research project. Maine milkweed, we're very fortunate to have 4 varieties. Asclepias syrica, and I won't mention the others, but Asclepias syrica, common milkweed, is what the majority of monarch females will look for. It has a mid-level toxicity, which is what they seem to prefer in research studies. And Maine is fortunate to have some of it, and hopefully we could have more of it. Milkweed contains cardiac glycosides. And again, the level of toxicity in milkweed varies from different plants, but basically if it's ingested, it can cause physical conditions, but it has in the past been used as medicine, a variety of medicines. If you are dealing with milkweed, you need to be very careful because that milkweed, that latex, if you get it in your eyes, can cause a serious reaction, and you just don't want it to get to your eyes. So either make sure you wear gloves or wash your hands when after you're done dealing with milkweed. Common milkweed, otherwise known as the swan plant. Generations 3 and 4, those are our generations that we get to interact with. The tagging program that was started by Dr. Urquhart is an annual program for tagging. And if you are interested in the process at all, please go to monarchwatch.org. There's plenty of information and tags are available for this year. Nectar sources for butterflies, moths, and other pollinators, especially in Maine. This list is available through the University of Maine Extension, but what I want to draw particular attention to is the late summer group, because this is what the migrators depend on. And the more they can eat, the more they can store in their bodies, means they have a stronger chance of migrating to Mexico, overwintering, and then helping to create the new next generation. Gay feather is the new one for me, and it's the one that I'm going to focus on because evidently it's very popular with monarchs, but also other pollinators, and it's a fall plant. Tagging program, the evidence is the records show that recovery numbers are greater for wild monarchs rather than reared monarchs, and that's a research project as to why is that so. If you do home rearing, it's a wonderful activity. You can learn so much from the process, but you do need to be responsible. This is not responsible. This is putting monarchs in as near normal a setting as possible. I have a net like this that's out on my front lawn. So the monarchs are exposed completely to the weather and sunlight and so forth. I'm simply protecting them from predators such as spiders and other things. But their life cycle is normal as possible. And this is what monarchs that we rear should be experiencing, something like this. How to help: plant milkweed native to the region, be cautious with the use of herbicides, pesticides, support organizations that promote land preservation, protection, educate yourself, which is what you're doing tonight. Thank you. Share what you learn. Become politically active to protect our environment. If you haven't seen the NOVA program on PBS called Butterfly Blueprints, I encourage you to see it. It's fascinating. It's not just monarchs, but it's an amazing program and insight into the connections that we're making with butterflies. Monarch Joint Venture, Monarch Watch. And this is not photoshopped. Thank you. Did I, Tori?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was awesome. So if anybody has any questions at this time, we'd ask you to just pop them in the chat. And I'm sure Cyrene would be more than happy to answer anything you guys are curious about. All right, looks like we have a question here from Carney asking, how do our islands provide habitat for monarchs?
They do. There's evidence, there's historical evidence of monarchs. Someone described there was a woman a number of years ago. She was in her 80s. I think the story goes, Carney, and she went out to, perhaps it was Matinicus, and she wanted to see if the butterflies were there because she remembered as a child watching the island being carpeted with orange, just like the Oyamel forests in Mexico. And if you go out to our islands, Monhegan is an island you can easily get to. You'll see the monarchs there. Wherever there's milkweed, the monarchs will follow. Someone said, you had a male monarch in late September. And yes, the migrating monarchs sometimes do make it to Florida rather than Mexico because of the winds. They depend on the winds to take them home. And some of them do end up in Florida, and that population in Florida does not become a migrating population. And that's where if you might be reading in the news where there's a concern about the OE being a major factor, and swamp milkweed, because milkweed does not die out in Florida. So that's a research concern. Details on rearing monarchs. If you go to monarchwatch.org and Monarch Joint Venture, they have the best resources available for all steps. And I can't recommend them highly enough. Invasive swallowwort, yes, it's almost a trick for monarchs because there is something about the chemical odors that are picked up, and if an egg is planted on deposited on the swallowwort, it's doomed. So if you can remove the swallowwort, it's a good move. Oh, somebody asked where to find milkweed plants. Your local nurseries will have the Maine milkweed, and you want to avoid any sources that might have treated milkweed. So places like Home Depot and Lowe's, you need to be cautious of, but the independent garden centers tend to have reliable milkweed. You need to ask. The other thing is you can also, you can dig milkweed up, common milkweed, if you're cautious. And again, if you research this online, I have dug up common milkweed roots and nurtured them for 2 weeks with willow water. Which is a hormone that has a hormone that stimulates growth. And I've put it in the ground and it can take off. Monarchs that go to Florida were not necessarily born there. They blew, it's both. There is a year-round population in Florida. with my understanding of it. As long as milkweed is available, it's possible for that population to continue to reproduce. So it is a combination.